everyone, and thanks for joining today's webinar on benchmarking for the cow-calf producer. This was done a few times across the province of Nova Scotia at the end of 2024 and starting of 2025. My name is Trottier. I am Perennia's beef and sheep specialist. So what we're going to be looking at today, we're going to be looking at some background information on what benchmarking is. When we talk about benchmarking, kind of what do we actually mean by it, and how does using on-farm data contribute to the profitability of that farm? So what data are we actually interested in collecting? There's another webinar that I will link in the bottom of this that goes over three different producers and their data management software that they are currently using. So to start with, I have a question for you. What does a profitable cow look like on your farm? So I'll give you just a minute to think about what this might look like. So profitable cows, it really is pretty basic things. So first and foremost, she's going to be healthy. She's going to have a good immune status. She's not going to be susceptible to different illnesses and diseases. She's going to be able to produce good quality colostrum to pass on those antibodies into her calf. She's also going to be efficient and do a good job at converting the feed that's in front of her into pounds of calf. So that's something that you can sell. We want her to produce a live calf every year. And in order for that to happen, she needs to start cycling quickly so that she can be rebred on time to be within that window. We also like cows that will wean a calf approximately half of her body weight. So the industry benchmark for this is at least 45%. So if we've got a cow who's 1,200 pounds, what we're looking for is her to wean a calf that is around that 600-pound benchmark. So this will vary depending on how long the calves are left with the cow, but that's kind of at least what we're looking for. And then we also want a cow who is retained in the herd long enough that she has paid for herself and she's actually generating profit. So if you look online and you Google how long does a cow need to be in the herd in order to have paid for herself, you'll see a lot of different answers from a lot of different sources. Some might say 3 to 4 years, some might say 7, up to 10. And what it really comes down to is you need to know your numbers and what it costs you to develop that heifer and start generating a profit from her. So just the long and the short of it is that she needs to stick around in the herd. So cow-calf profitability, it's going to be really strongly tied to that cow's reproductive efficiency and the reproductive efficiency of all the cows in the herd. So when we're talking about profitability, there's two ways that we can think about this. So the first way is to increase production, so increase what we are selling. So as cow-calf producers, this would be pounds of calf. And then the other side to this is managing your costs. So when I was originally putting this together, my knee-jerk reaction was to say decrease costs, increase production, decrease costs. But then I was very quickly reminded, actually, managing costs is what the goal is rather than decreasing, because oftentimes it makes sense in order to spend more money in one area if it means that you're going to have a positive impact. So for example, if you lime your field, so that's an expense that you're paying, but then you get the benefits of improved fertility, so your fertilizer use efficiency will increase. Your yields probably will increase. The quality of that forage that you're producing is probably going to increase. So that's what I mean when I say manage cost, not necessarily decrease. So keeping that increasing production point in mind, there are things that we can do that will influence a cow's ability to wean a heavy calf. So that would be pounds of calf that we have to sell. So that's increasing production. So things like management of that cow, so how she's being fed, where she's being kept, what the air quality may be like, will have a big impact on how she does, how well she's able to wean a heavy calf. Diet really closely related, how well that cow is being fed, which leads into the condition of the cow. So this is so important. I'm going to just put a pin in this. I'll come back to it in a slide or two. The genetics, both of the cow, but then also of the herd bull that's being used, and then the environment of that cow again. So what's pasture conditions like, what's if they're in a barn, what's the air quality like, that sort of thing. So that's kind of a really quick run through of a lot of different things, not really touching on anything. But the point that I want to make here is that there are a lot of things that we can control that influence this. And so without kind of knowing what your data is, it can be really difficult to know where to start if this is a goal that you're wanting to work towards. So when we're talking about record keeping and benchmarking, what we're looking for is what is that low-hanging fruit that we want to start to tackle and set some goals. So coming back to this idea of body condition scoring and maintaining a cow's body condition. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the concept of body condition scoring, typically in Canada we use a scale of 1 to 5, where a cow who is a score of 1, she would be way too thin, so very underconditioned, very little fat stores. She will be thin, she'll be weak. Luckily, you'll nearly never see a cow who is quite this thin. There would be some significant neglect or some significant health issues that were happening in order to get to that point. But she'll be very stress intolerant. Her calf is not going to do well because she's not going to be able to produce good quality milk for that calf. So that having cows that are that thin is not going to be profitable. The other end of the spectrum would be a score of 5. So this would be a cow that is very obese. So very high level of body fat. How well that cow can move around is going to be impaired. There's going to be risk of calving problems because there's going to be so much kind of internal fat that is decreasing the space of that the birth canal. So again, you don't often see cows that would be a score of 5. Kind of what we're aiming for would be a score of 3. So the kind of not too thin, not too fat, kind of the Goldilocks score. So when cows are in that ideal condition, what you'll see is they tend to have higher pregnancy rates. They start cycling after calving quicker. They have healthier and better performing calves. Those calves get off to a better start. That cow is able to produce good quality milk, good quality colostrum. And they also tend to have fewer calving problems, abortions, and stillbirths. So that's where there is room for a profit to be made. So I took this figure from the Beef Cattle Research Council, which is a really amazing website. If you haven't had a chance to check it out yet, it's beefresearch.ca. They've got all sorts of really great resources, topic pages, there's interactive calculators, blog posts, lots of really good stuff for Canadian beef producers. So highly encourage you to check it out. But when they had put this together, it was a couple of years ago, they figured that if you had 80 cows who were in the right condition, so that's the condition score of 3, and if their weaned calves were selling for $1.80 a pound, so this was a couple of years ago, so just imagine in today's economy this would be higher, they would have a profit that's almost $17,000 higher. So again, in today's climate, that would be higher than if that same herd was underconditioned, so body condition score of 2. So we're not even talking like grossly underweight, we're just talking a little bit on the thinner side. So that's a really significant difference in terms of how much profit actually can be kept by the producer. So if we just want to have a closer look at some cow performance metrics comparing body condition score of 2 and body condition score of 3. So if we look at pregnancy rate, that will be increased for body condition score of 3. There's calving interval is decreased. The amount of cows that start to cycle or show estrus 30 days post-calving. So 61%, so 6 out of 10 cows that are on the thinner side are going to start to cycle after 30 days. compared to almost 9 out of 10 for those cows who are properly conditioned. So it's kind of interesting if you look here. So now if we're looking at 60 days, so it takes twice the amount of time for those cows that are on the thinner side to start cycling at that same 9 out of 10 level. So cows in the right condition, they'll have calves with a higher average weaning weight. Those calves will grow better. Abortion rates decrease, and the risk of severe dystocia, so severe calving problems, decreases. So when that cow's calving, she's got greater energy reserves. The calving process tends to go better, go quicker, and so when that calf hits the ground, it's less stressed, it's less at risk of not thriving. So another rhetorical question for you. So how are the management decisions currently being made on your farm? So I'll just pause for a few minutes so you can think. So there was an interesting report that came out a couple of years ago, and it was looking at the impacts of beneficial business practices on Canadian farms. So what they did is they looked at over 600 farms from across Canada of all different sizes, all different types, and one thing that they found was that it didn't matter what type of farm it was, if that farm was engaging in some sort of management activity, so they were proactively managing, they had stronger financials than those farms that did not. So that I think really strongly illustrates how actively managing and proactively making decisions tends to put you off in a better financial position than if you are making your management decisions based on, I guess, reactive measures. So why bother to monitor that cow herd productivity year over year? So it can allow you to pick up on issues that might not be so obvious when you're in your day-to-day. You might need to take a step back and kind of look at what those numbers are showing you to see some trends, because there are some things that will creep over time, and without kind of that step back look, it can be difficult to identify kind of what's going on. And then also knowing what your baseline productivity is allows you to identify what your strengths and weaknesses are, so what you're doing really well, maybe where's some room for improvement, and then set some goals. So benchmarking is very similar to this idea of record keeping and knowing kind of what your baseline productivity is, but it's slightly different. So when we're talking about benchmarking, we're going to identify what our common definitions, what common calculations are, and what we kind of mean by that, so that we can make comparisons across different areas. So you can compare yourself from year to year and know that you're talking about the same thing every year. But you can also compare your data to other cow-calf producers in Nova Scotia who are doing similar things as you. And then if you have the same definitions, same calculations, you can also compare yourself to somebody in Alberta or BC, for example, and compare how you're doing to the rest of the industry. So again, this is going to let you see kind of in a greater context what your herd management strengths are, what your weaknesses are, so that you can manage based on those. And it's going to enable and promote that proactive versus reactive management. And I'll just say here that when you are looking at benchmarking and making comparisons, the number one person that you should be making a comparison to is yourself from last year. So when we are talking about collecting data, using it as a tool for making decisions, it's really important that the data that's going into this data machine is accurate and up to date. If you are going to be using this data to make better decisions and turn information into actions, it's really important that the data that's going in is good. If you put garbage in, what you get out is garbage. I guess the flip side to this is that if you have nothing that's going into this so-called data machine, you're also not going to get anything out either. So there was an analysis that was done on some cow-calf farms that showed that those who are actively using their own farm data rather than looking at industry averages, what else is going on in the province, or well, I guess wouldn't be province, but elsewhere, they tended to have lower unit costs of production per calf weaned. So their costs to produce those pounds of calf were less, so they had more opportunity to retain some of that profit. They also found that operations who were using their own data were the most profitable over time. And the more information that producers gather on their operations, the more efficient the knowledge and management of that herd becomes. So if we think about knowledge being power, if you have more knowledge, then that gives you more power in your decision-making process. There is a caveat to that. Don't just collect data for the sake of collecting data. It's important to kind of outline what your goals are, what you want to be working towards, and what data points are going to support that. So yeah, it can be easy to get kind of bogged down in collecting a lot of things. So yeah, just being mindful of what data is actually useful for you to collect. That said, it is a good idea to kind of have a baseline idea, especially if you're tracking trends over time, because I don't know, 10 years down the road, you might say, oh, I wish I had 10 years worth of data on this. So yeah, you'll have to think about what is going to be useful for you kind of now and then also in the future. So one tool, going back to this Beef Cattle Research Council, that I want to highlight is their cow-calf production indicators calculator. So I will go through this in a little bit, but basically how it works, you just go into the website, find it on their website, and then it runs in the web browser, so you don't need to download anything. It just works right in the page. You enter your own production numbers, so there's spaces for you to put 15 of your own data points in there, and it's going to do calculations for you, and it's also going to compare them with the target for the Canadian cow-calf industry, and then also the regional benchmark from the most recent regional cow-calf survey. So that would have been the survey that was done in 2023, and the results for that came out in the fall of 2024. So one thing that I'm interested in doing is having some Nova Scotia specific benchmarking groups. So I'm going to just put a pin in that. I'll come back to that kind of once I outline what these production indicators are. So the first one that they ask for would be conception rates. So this would be out of all the females that were exposed to the bull, how many of those actually were bred. So in order to know this number, you do need to have a vet out doing preg checks. So this number would indicate the cow herd's fertility, can also be used to indicate the fertility of the herd bull. So from the most recent cow-calf survey, the benchmark for Eastern Canada, so that's the Maritime provinces plus Quebec, is 94%. So of the producers who are doing preg checks, 94% of those cows that were exposed to a bull ended up being bred. So the next one is the length of the calving period. So this is simply how many days elapsed between when that first calf hit the ground and when that last calf hit the ground. So if the goal is to have a cow-calf once a year, and there is a 285-day gestation, give or take, then your calving season should be 80 days or less. So the current benchmark for Eastern Canada is 106 days. So if this was my farm and my average calving period was 106 days, I can see that the industry standard is 80 days. Then that's kind of an area where I could look at and say, okay, I want to tighten this up a little bit, get a little bit closer to 80 days, and then look at how I might start to tighten that up. The next one would be the cow to bull ratio. So how many bulls used per how many females exposed. So if there's low fertility or inadequate bull power, could decrease the conception rates. So in Eastern Canada, we do tend to think about this a little bit differently than out west, just because we do tend to have smaller herd sizes, smaller fields, so we might need more bulls kind of in the rotation just to maintain genetics or to be in different fields. But the industry standard is 1 bull servicing 21 cows in Eastern Canada. So the next one is the calving rate. So of the females who were bred, how many had full-term calves? So we're including anything that made it to full term, so whether it is born alive or stillbirth. So this is going to give you an indication of how that cow was managed during her gestation. So 90% is the Eastern Canada benchmark. So the next one would be the weaning rate. So you could also call this your calf crop percentage or your weaning percentage. So this would be out of all the females who were exposed to the bull, how many of those females weaned a calf? So as a cow-calf producer who is selling pounds of calf, if you have calf losses, this is going to really reduce your profitability, and it can be influenced by a lot of different things. So your herd health protocols, exposure to diseases, potential for predation, and weather events. So when we're talking about calf mortality, we're typically looking at 2 different periods. So did we have any calf losses from the first 24 hours after birth? Or did we have any losses from kind of day 1 up until weaning? Because these typically will have different causes of death. So a calf who is 3 hours old probably died for a different reason than a calf who is 3 weeks old or 3 months old. So in order to reduce calf loss, we need to know what's causing them. So 85% weaning rate is the benchmark for Eastern Canada. So of all the females that were exposed to bulls, 85% of those weaned a calf. So there was a study that came out, I guess, a little more than 10 years ago now, that CanFax had put together, and what they found is that if there's a 1% increase in death loss in your calf crop, that will increase your cost of production by $7.45 per head. So it really can increase your costs. Next up is the average weaning weight. So the total pounds of calves weaned divided by the number of calves that are weaned. So again, this gross revenue is going to be directly related to the number of pounds you produce. And if you have good records, that can allow you opportunities to improve those weaning weights. So you can look at your calving distribution. So are you having a lot of calves that are born later in the calving season? What your weaning protocols are. So if those calves are really stressed at weaning, might knock them back a bit, and they lose a little bit of traction there. Or if they're nice and calm and that goes well, then they tend to get off to a good start kind of as a weaned calf. The genetics that you're using, both from the sire side, but then also the cow side, and then pasture management. So if your pastures are not in great shape, your cows are having to travel quite a distance to maintain her intake, that's going to have an impact on how well those calves are doing as well. So that same CanFax study, they found that if you have a 5% increase in your weaning weights, has been shown to decrease your cost of production by almost $7 per head. So that would be last year, if your average weaning weight was, let's say, 600 pounds, this year the average weaning weight is 605. So it does have an impact on your costs and how those can be decreased. So calving distribution would be the next production indicator. So every time that a cow is not bred during her 21-day heat cycle, because that calf is born later, it doesn't have the same opportunity to gain weight that earlier calves do. So it can end up costing between 40 to 50 pounds of weaning weight, assuming that all the calves are gaining at the same rate. So 51% of calves being born in that first cycle is the current benchmark for Eastern Canada. So from this, we can do some further calculations. So I think a really key one is how many pounds weaned per female exposed to the bull. So again, as a commercial cow-calf producer, the revenue that you're generating is based on the total pounds of calf that is weaned and sold. So there is two ways that you can increase the total pounds of calf weaned. So this is the total calf crop, not individual animals. So the first one would be to increase the average weight of each calf weaned. So that's going to bring up the average weight of the calf crop, or to increase the number of calves that are weaned. So these are not mutually exclusive. These will interact with each other. So if you have heavier weaning weights one year, but you have higher death rates, then you don't necessarily get that same increase, and then vice versa as well. So if one year you have lighter calves, but you have more of them, that's going to have an interaction kind of on what that total pounds of calf that you're selling is. But kind of regardless of the scenario that you're targeting, your cows are going to have to be managed appropriately to make sure that they are able to rebreed on time. So when we're looking at reproductive efficiency, it's going to consider the number of calves born per the number of cows exposed. So we're looking at both the conception rate and the calving rate. So that CanFact study, again, they found that a 2% increase in that reproductive efficiency is going to decrease your costs to produce those pounds of calf by $16.50 per head. So really small increments can have an impact on whether or not those costs are going to increase or decrease. So when we're looking at this pounds weaned per female exposed, so again, this is going to be a metric that's comparable across herds. So what we're considering is we've got the cow herd, and all those cows require feed, require care, and there's a cost associated with that. And if not all of them produce a calf to be sold, we're going to have to take the revenue generated from the calves that are sold and allocate that to the entire cow herd, right? Because we've got some cows who are freeloading, so we need to attribute some pounds of calf to them. So if we've got a 50 cow herd, let's say that our weaning percentage is 94%, give or take, which would be the benchmark for the industry. So we're going to assume that 47 calves are weaned from this 50 cow herd. And our average weaning weight, just as an example, is 580 pounds. So when we're looking at pounds weaned for female exposed, we're taking that 580 pounds and then we are redistributing that to account for those cows who did not wean a calf. So we're actually looking at 545 pounds weaned per cow exposed. And then from here, we can start to look at, okay, what does it actually cost to produce a pound of beef, a pound of calf? So we can start looking at some of those winter feeding costs and yardage costs, which are going to be a really significant amount of what goes into producing that pound of beef. So the other thing that we can calculate from these production indicators would be the average weaning weight as a percentage of mature cow weight. So when we are looking at improving cow efficiency, we can do this a couple ways. So we can look at lowering that feed conversion ratio and then lowering the energy requirement for that cow. So this would not be a short-term goal. This is long-term. This is looking at genetics and selecting for feed efficiency. Or we can look at higher productivity by targeting heavier weaning weights, lower death losses, higher reproductive efficiency. So these are things that we can manage for. These are more short-term wins that we can work towards. So what we are looking at doing here, let me see if I can get a pointer here. So our goal is going to be to have a low birth weight, the same mature weight, but a heavier weaning weight. So we've got the birth weights here, and then we've got two different ways that we could wean these calves. We could have a lighter weaning weight here, or we could have a heavier weaning weight here. And this is what we're targeting, this growth curve along here, because right in here, that's where there's an opportunity to generate profit. So again, if we look back to, or if we touch on this concept of a cow weaning a calf who's at least half her body weight, currently in Eastern Canada, our benchmark is 41%. So there is some room for heavier weaning weights there. So Beef Cattle Research Council, they have identified the gold standard for record keeping. So based on those 15 data points, they found that, or what they're calling kind of their gold standard would be the growth of your calves, the number of open cows, the length of your calving season, and then your calf death loss. So this is what it actually looks like if you go onto the Beef Cattle Research Council website. So when you find the calculator, this is how it looks. So step one would be to enter all the information in the yellow highlighted cells. So there's 15 spots here that are yellow, and then you can put in your own numbers, and then it's going to automatically start to calculate the different percents and then compare it to kind of what that industry target is and then the regional benchmark. So if you look here, the first one, or I guess if we skip down to conception rate, so let's say that we had 28 cows that were bred, they were preg checked, but we had 30 females that were exposed. So it's going to automatically calculate that 93% is our conception rate. And then it's going to automatically compare that to 94%, which is the industry target. And it's going to flag that as red to tell me that that's an opportunity to improve. And then it's going to compare it in step 3 to the regional benchmark, which is the same. It just happens to be the same for Eastern Canada at 94%. So again, even comparing to my local industry, this is telling me that there is an opportunity to improve. Whereas if we look down to the next one, the length of calving period, I'm just popping in 53 days just as an example. And then if we look over 63 days is the industry target. So it's going to turn green and tell us that we are meeting or exceeding that target. And then 106 days would be the regional benchmark for Eastern Canada. And because we're at 53 days, just as the example, it's going to tell us meets or exceeds the benchmark. So that's kind of how it works. And then if you scroll down, it'll give you your gold indicators as well. So that you may see again. So for those of you in Nova Scotia who are planning to apply to Nova Scotia Cattle Producers programs moving forward, they are going to be requiring the same information for any applications after April 1st of 2025. So they're wanting information on calf growth rate, cow open rate, length of calving period, and your calf death loss rate. So it can kind of walk you through those calculations there if needed. So one thing that I am interested in putting together is some benchmarking groups. So how I see this happening is either some small groups across the province of producers who are interested in collecting some of this benchmarking data and working together and providing me, Perennia, with that information so that I can compile it and collate it so that you can't see whose number is whose. We can get together and talk about kind of what the Nova Scotia benchmark is. So it's really local, it's really specific. It's also going to give you an opportunity to see how your numbers compare to that group and then kind of set goals and track over time. So I will strongly encourage any producers who are interested in this to collect this key data this calving season. So the production indicators that we just went through, I will send those out again later. So submit what you have to Perennia. So again, I'm going to average all that data out so that you can't see anyone's numbers. And then I'm going to return the averaged values from Nova Scotia to you for comparison and goal setting. And I'm going to do workshops just like this again next winter, where we walk through kind of what we, from the first year of collecting this, what sort of numbers that we got, and kind of as an industry where there's opportunities to move forward. So I'll just outline some of the programs that exist in the province, just in case that you're not familiar with it. So first up would be the Nova Scotia Preconditioning Program. So Nova Scotia Cattle Producers, they do own a mobile handling system, and mobile is kind of, I guess, kind of loosely used, but there is equipment that can be brought to your farm, and there is help that comes with this. So this can be used for tagging, age verification, administering vaccines, castrating, dehorning, weighing your animals. If you set this up with your vet, they can come out and do preg checks if you kind of have them come out at the same time. So if you don't have handling equipment, this is an option for you. So the cost structure for this is based on a flat call fee, an hourly shoot service fee, plus the mileage. So if it's something that you're interested in, reach out to the Nova Scotia Cattle Producers. There is a herd renewal and expansion that, I mean, there's a new one, so ignore this February 15th. There is a new one April 1st. So there's funding available for heifer retention, seed stock development. So if you send a bull to test or you're doing a test on farm, there's money available for that. If you have your vet out and you come up with a herd health planning calendar, so the vet will help you come up with what your year looks like in terms of when you're vaccinating, that sort of thing. There's, I think, $200 available for that. There's money available for the preconditioning services that I just went through. If you're part of EBP, you can get money back for your audit, or if you want to put some cameras up in your barns, there is money available for setting up surveillance systems as well. And then there's also a kelp data management workshop that at the time followed this webinar immediately. What I'm going to do is I'm going to link it in the description of this video. So there are 3 producers who are outlining their data management programs. So there's a producer who's talking about Herdly and how it works for them. There's somebody talking about CattleMax and how it's working for them, and then Google Sheets, I guess the whole Google Suites, and yeah, how they're using that kind of as a free alternative. So that's the end of this webinar. Thanks for tuning in. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out, and we look forward to working with you.